Hey guys, it's Roarin, like Lauren with an R instead of an L in front. And as y'all know, I help change makers and marketers get out of the hustle and grind of marketing and back into building impact and relationships with their communities. And today we're doing something a little bit different. You're going to be following me along as I repot some of my plants in the last leg of the fall before the winter kicks in. Now, you have been following me for a while. You know, one of the biggest things that I talk about when creating a successful marketing team for your company is about creating a system that is not only functional in the process, but built with your team of creative human beings in mind. And what makes a marketing system great is not about just quickly achieving large goals, but to create an environment that fosters creativity, adaptability, and that way it can match the marketing goals that you need to help your company thrive. And also, as you hear me say a lot, is that human beings are just like plants. Not all of us are made the same, and we all need different light, water, and soil. So as a leader, aka the cultivator of a company's garden of plants, we need to recognize what these different needs are, and most importantly, give our team, aka the plants in the garden, space after giving them these needs to adapt to their environment. So yes, this is a garden of plants, and remember, everyone is motivated for different reasons, and creating a system that allows individuals to tap into their unique zones of genius and continue to thrive is the end goal. So as leaders, it's about meeting the team member where they are at. Many leaders go through years of leadership development to actually learn to become emotionally intelligent, but we all have to realize, even including these leaders that have been in leadership for a while, that we all started somewhere. So how can we help our team members grow their own resilience and emotional intelligence that will keep them motivated and foster collaboration between each other? And that starts meeting where they are and understanding with what motivates them. So in this video, we're going to talk about different examples of plants and how they are able to be taken care of and thrive, and just talk through like different scenarios that often show up for us in the workplace. Let us begin. This here is a pothos. It was a pothos given to me by a good friend. It was his first plant that he's ever had, and Lord, if you can tell, it definitely needs a repot. It's got it poking out there. But he told me one thing as well, was that he hasn't repotted this guy in 5 years. He didn't know that he had a repot, or like, you know, even if it stays in the same soil, you need to change the soil. And immediately off the bat, I'm noticing a lot of soggy soil. And if you look at it, it's just really intense root rot. If you look at where the green part is towards the roots, as I like break it out, that is like shriveling and dying. And so this is a great example of how sometimes someone does really good in a pot in their position, but they've been in that position for 5 years and cement builds up and things build up. So we just got to give it some new soil that it loves, for some TLC, so that it can have some fun and new soil and new nutrients where it can grow. And then it can bring on new leaves, because if someone's been stuck in the same position for 5 years, and at some point they will wake up and say, why am I still here? Right? And so even if it comes to our rock stars, like they climb the corporate ladder, so to speak, doesn't mean that they may not go up managers because they don't want to be a manager in the sense, doesn't mean that they can't still increase or take on a project. Maybe they're a lead innovator in your team that is constantly giving you new projects and new ideas. And that might be a great way for you to continue into keeping them engaged with you while they're in their specific position within your team. Because some people are totally different. Some people are like snake plants. They thrive off of neglect. You set them up with the right expectations and occasionally check in with them, but for the most part, you leave them alone. While others are like a fig tree. You have to keep a closer eye on them, because if there's one thing wrong, they may lose all their leaves in protest with you. And then pothos. They're the resilient one. They survive pretty much anywhere, but even in toxic environments, they fail to thrive already. So we have a snake plant here. And as you can tell, very very in need of a repot because that roots are just sticking out like crazy. So this is a new snake plant, and obviously they've been overwatered, been in the wrong soil type, and you could tell their roots are red, which means that were not happy at all. Here's the thing about snake plants: they thrive off of neglect. But even snake plants need attention, and the same thing also applies to human beings. Think of the person on your team who you like, I know so-and-so's got my back. They know what they need to do. They show up every day. They do great stuff. They got it. They got their back. But even those people need attention and TLC. Just because they can thrive off of neglect and they like being left alone doesn't mean that they're not still part of the team, right? Like they still want you to pay attention to them and help them grow. It may just be like in their annual performance, or maybe once 6 months or once per quarter, you're actually doing a deep check-in, whereas your other plants that need way more attention, like a baby intern, is one that you're checking in with at the end of every single week, right? Like it just really depends. So that's something to note, is like, don't just leave them alone. So what ends up creating a toxic environment? It's usually not a toxic play, like someone coming in. It's usually not someone coming in with the intention to be toxic and like really trying to take advantage of another person. Despite that, there are previous studies out there that says 25% of CEOs are sociopaths. Most human beings and managers and business owners are honestly in the business of growing the business and making sure that their people are provided for. Where toxicity can actually grow in plants, aka humans, is in forms of what we see the most active, which is like neglect. So think quiet firing, quiet quitting, but it actually starts with the wrong setting of expectations. And that is because assumptions that are unspoken will end up creating unnecessary resentment. And those moments of misaligned expectations is actually where the small paper cut effect kicks in, and if left untreated can turn septic and eventually turn toxic. Like when we're just talking about plants, you can accidentally forget to overwater or put it out too much in the sun when it shouldn't be in the sun or anything like that. But it's just when it's prolonged, continuous, and you're not rectifying, you don't move them out from the sun or move them towards the sun, you don't. And so it's in those situations, if left untreated, can turn septic and eventually turn toxic. But even my old one, like when I first started planting, I didn't know what good soils are, so I actually reuse the same soil. And if you could tell with these roots here, you don't want to do that because those are root rotted soil, and it basically means that there's like bacteria. As you can see, I'm breaking apart roots as they come through. And this also applies to leaders, right? Like sometimes you don't want to just leave them without nurturing because they're so successful, because even after 2 years, they need a repot and need some extra TLC and love. Otherwise, they turn into this guy where they have been so severely neglected of a repot that they lost half of their roots along the way. Okay, and we have a ZZ plant. This is a dark ZZ, so it's a raven ZZ. Most of the time they're green, but you can actually get these really cool dark ZZ ones. So ZZ plants are self-reliant and need to be watered about 2 times a month. And holy crap, it was just sitting there and the amount of root rot that I did not realize. This one, if you're noticing some burnt, it had a lot of heat trauma, and because I accidentally left him in the car in 100-degree weather in the middle of the summer, and that didn't do it well at all. It did suffer a lot of major heat trauma. Like as you could see, that soil is super wet. So it was just like it had heat trauma, and then it was suffering overwatering, and that was just a whole lot. So people can survive a lot of major stress trauma, like in a car at 100 degrees, but they need some TLC. And my ZZ plant grew out of an old pot on her own, but she was still very severely traumatized and needed a new pot and also room to grow into too. And this is just a great reflection that even though we as human beings are very resilient and we can survive intense trauma, Just because we can doesn't mean that we have to. Like, there are better ways that we can set up business models, expectations of goals, of growth, and all of those things in between to where we can grow sustainably and not always be under like 110 miles per hour intense stress on our bodies. So that like even our super major resilient team members, they don't eventually burn out and like deal with root rot. Or like not given a chance to recoup after a major stretch. Like, you can have stretch goals in launching your business or launching a next phase of growth, but it can't be launch after launch after launch, because the reality is that even the most resilient human being is not a machine, and even machines wear out over time. And so it's about understanding that how can we allow us as human beings be able to grow and be able to recoup so that we can continuously grow for the long term. Now, I do want to point out that there is a difference between toxic environment versus hostile environment. A toxic environment is one where a person is unmotivated, they don't want to show up to work. It leads into situations like quiet firing or a hostile environment is where you feel unsafe for your safety entering into this work environment. And that can be cases of SH or SA or anything like that. So what we're specifically talking about is the earlier definition, which is toxic environment, where you are not excited to go into this environment. And from a leadership perspective, when a leader comes to me and says, how did we get here? I feel horrible that we got here. It's basically because we've done a couple of things where we potentially may have overwatered, where we're doing too many things at once, causing root rot, underwatering, not doing enough, and letting things dry out and die, forget to change the soil, neglecting the problem where it turns septic and there isn't enough oxygen left in the soil, leave it too close to light, letting your team learn trial by fire and then ending up getting burned. Does all of these situations sound familiar? All of these instances can leave the plant or a team member in pain. And in those moments, we need to give that person or plant some TLC. Sometimes it's changing the soil, making sure it's not overwatered. And sometimes it's keeping an eye to make sure that the mealybugs or thrips or other pests don't come back. And basically that means addressing the problem and creating space for accountability of change that needs already. Sometimes you may actually have multiple employees join. We want them to settle for a couple weeks, and this is a rule of thumb for all plant owners. When you buy a new plant from a nursery or from a store, don't go and try to repot them instantaneously. You have to move them into your environment, get them through the quarantine phase so that they don't come in with existing pests and then infect everybody else, right? So there's think of that as the 2-week onboarding phase where they're you're getting a sense of who they are, they're doing great, they're learning and all that jazz. And then we want to have them settle in for a couple of weeks in the new environment before repotting them immediately. So it's you want to have them settle in, and then you move them to their spot, and then depending on where they are in their journey, you may repot them. So the same thing applies for people. It's we want them to come into our company or join our team. The first couple of weeks is onboarding, lots of trial by fire, and then it's the first month or so they're starting to figure stuff out along the way, right? And so and one of the biggest things is that it's super easy to want to dump a lot of the much needed stuff immediately off your plate. But giving them the structure and the time will help them learn to thrive independently and last longer with you. You also may want to repot them from the nursery and check for root plugs. And root plugs, like I said, they are the limiting barriers that are brought on to us through personal experience or society expectations. And our role as leaders is to help them get settled, eventually put them into the new pots in this new role without those limiting barriers so that they can continue to grow and thrive. And they may freak out during this repotting season. If you could see as I'm undoing them, there's a lot of roots coming out in the fold, right? They may freak out along the way. But you have to be gentle. This is another key thing as you're going through these repots is that When you're done repotting them, you have to be very careful about how you water them so you don't overwater or don't underwater. You're going to keep a closer eye on them, and that is something to consider for anything that we talk about with humans in general, is that when we go through these deep repot phases, it's kind of like those like deep sessions or mentoring or growth sessions. It's not just like, let me do this unpouring of the soul with you, and then like a deep dive into your soul or assessment of who you are as a human being, and then leave you alone immediately afterwards. No, you still want to be able to check in on them afterwards. And in those check-ins is where accountability kicks in and things like that, where you get to check to see if the expectations that and the goals and expectations of growth that you set before is effective afterwards. So those are things to think about when you're repotting. So what does this mean for us as leaders, like individual leaders? One of the things that we need to define as a leader is not to be a fixer, because the reality is this is still a two-way street communication process. We can set up the environment as much as possible like a plant. We can say, here is a repot, let me give you better light, give you soil, etc. But it is still ultimately up to the plant if they want to choose to be resilient and thrive or not. And people are the same. The individual person decides if they want to rise up to the occasion and come out of this or choose to hunker down. And it's not our job as leaders to be their therapist. All we can do is set them up for success. And only they, if it's a mental trigger or something that is causing them not to be excited, that is ultimately their choice on if they seek help, right? We can't control or tell them to fix it. But what we can do is make their environment and give them the space and adjust to things so that they have a chance to heal and be able to grow afterwards, right? So when we shift the focus away from molding the ideal person to our environment and rather create an ideal environment where others can thrive, then people in our team will actually see this as an example of us as leaders leading the way, where they can create situations and work together. And tactically, it can show up creating a clear, non-intense emotional communication space where people will feel safe to speak up. They want to collectively brainstorm a solution, and they want to set tangible next steps that will be reviewed at a later date. It doesn't take the leader every single time to be the person that calls out that mindful pause, but if we don't create an environment where that is rewarded, then that will never. One of my favorite people in the world who talks about leadership and vulnerability is Brené Brown. Highly suggest for you guys to check out her book, Dare to Lead. A question that she uses to make sure that everyone is on the same page with clear expectations is, what does done look like? This allows for the team to have a brief mindful pause. We're talking like less than 5 minutes sometimes in conversation. What this does is allows us to create a brief chance to really deep dive, understand what it looks like, and then be able to leave with the correct expectations. Now, we've talked a lot about how to take care of everyone else, but we also need to remember that we as leaders are also plants ourselves. Yes, while we are so busy tending the garden, we too are plants. And if we don't take care of ourselves first, then we don't actually have the energy to take care of others. We aren't machines, and we are human beings. And gardening is hard work, guys. Like when I'm repotting all of these pods, that is a intense workout, and I have to be mentally ready for it. But if I don't take care of myself along the way, it's really hard to be able to do that. So that same thing applies to us as leaders. And most importantly, it's about leading by example, actually doing it. We can be the best version of ourselves, but if we don't actually lead by actions, it's really telling for our team members, because they see you say something and then they see you do something else. And it's a lot of pressure for leaders to be perfect, because perfectionism does not exist. It's just an illusion of when someone is confident and comfortable with who they truly are, the good and the bad. At the end of the day, our job as a leader is not about like, let me be your guardrail and hold space for you. It's about, can I lead by example? Can I create an environment that allows myself to be set up for success? And in turn, it also sets other people up for success. And that speaks volumes. And what that does is it actually creates a space for future leaders in our team to realize that they don't need to sacrifice themselves to move up in life. Plus, you don't want to be a calathea, right? Like, I know they are the meme of the internet. Most plant owners think of them high maintenance, but I think of them more as that they are exploding and they have to live up to this expectation of being beautiful, aka perfect. When something goes wrong, they explode. And personally, as a leader, I've done that when I was younger, where I would hold it all in and explode. And now I've learned that as a recovering perfectionist, that the best thing that I can do is own my own boundaries. And in turn, this inspires others to own their boundaries. When we own boundaries and communicate these boundaries, it creates, again, that space where there's mutual expectation and mutual respect for each other. Alrighty, guys, I hope you've had a great time listening to me talk about different plants. If you've been watching till the end, thank you so much for listening. Please comment down below if some of these examples have made it feel relevant for you and you're like, oh my God, I know someone. Feel free to comment down below. As always, be sure to like and subscribe. And one final piece, guys, remember, we are plants, and that means we take time to grow into ourselves. So no need to feel rushed. Remember, one step at a time, and I will see you in my next video. Goodbye.